If you're trying to stay up to date on the latest Marvel content, you'll want to subscribe to the Disney Plus streaming service. Not only will this get you access to tons of classics, but you'll get to see your favorite Marvel characters in all new series. Just click the link in the description to start your free trial. What does a character have to do in order to get a standalone movie in the MCU? Well, if you're Natasha Romanoff, you have to plummet to your doom from the cliffs of Vormir. No big deal. The Black Widow movie will take place after Captain America Civil War, which seems obvious after what happened during Endgame. But have we really seen the end of Natasha? Is there a reason the movie glossed over Captain America's return to Vormir, and could this hero have managed to survive? Let's talk about how she could still be alive and what that would mean for her post-Endgame existence. Going into the movie, we knew that going after the Soul Stone would be a particularly perilous mission. Just look at what Thanos had to do in order to get his hands on it. It was clear that someone was going to be sacrificed, we just didn't know who, and it turns out that we were not alone. Writers Stephen McFeely and Christopher Marcus agreed that someone was going off that cliff and briefly considered making it Steve Rogers, Bruce Banner, or Clint Barton. They admitted that they balked at the idea of getting rid of the first female hero, but when they suggested having Hawkeye make the final sacrifice, the women on the crew weren't having it. It wasn't like Natasha met her end because she lost a fight. In fact, she managed to win her fight against Clint. Just because the prize wasn't the one you'd want doesn't mean that wasn't a victory. She made a noble sacrifice which seemed like a fitting end to her story. There was a time when Black Widow only looked out for herself. During Age of Ultron, she even suggested that she and Bruce run away together, which was pretty awkward. But after the decimation, she stuck around and kept the remaining heroes together as much as she could. It was a way of showing how far she'd come, but does that mean she really had to go? Even fans who think this was a fitting end don't necessarily think it was handled well in the movie. Since she perished before the finale, her passing was definitely overshadowed by all the craziness that happened afterwards. And unlike Tony Stark, she didn't even get a funeral or any indication that people were aware she was gone. Smart Hulk told Clint he couldn't bring her back with the Infinity Stones, but that was really it. Yes, she was a secret agent at one point, but she was also an Avenger, and people definitely knew who she was. The specter of Tony Stark was all over Far From Home, but nobody even mentioned Natasha at any point. There was actually a scene cut from the final movie which made Natasha's passing seem a lot more dramatic. While Clint and Natasha argued about who should sacrifice themselves, Thanos and his army arrived and things got hectic to say the least. When Natasha approached the edge of the cliff, she took some serious blows, and Clint had to deal with Thanos while simultaneously taking in his loss. But needless to say, this over-the-top confrontation didn't end up happening in the final movie. It's not hard to see how Natasha's sacrifice fit into her story arc and made sense for her character. Her relationship with Clint and his family was well established, so this was all believable. But bringing her back to life wouldn't detract from her sacrifice. She fell off the cliff fully believing it would be the end for her. It's kind of like Steve Rogers throwing himself onto what he thought was a live grenade in the First Avenger. Even though it was just a test, it was a great way to illustrate his moral fortitude. But how could Natasha still be alive? Well, to point out the incredibly obvious, this is a fictional universe based on comic books. Do you have any idea how often people lose their lives and come back in those things? Seriously, it's one of the most common tropes out there. Other than poor old Uncle Ben, most characters vanish only to reappear sometime later with some kind of convoluted explanation. During a catastrophic multiversal phenomenon known as an incursion, Natasha lost her life when her spaceship exploded. But don't worry, she got better. Eventually, the multiverse was restored and our hero was right as rain again. Considering that the multiverse is now a thing and time travel has been introduced into the MCU, it definitely seems like the movie universe is becoming more and more similar to the one we know from the comic books. Since these other elements have been successfully incorporated into the MCU, then it's not crazy to suggest that maybe passing away is less than final. Just look at Loki, who definitely looked gone in Infinity War, yet managed to sneak away to his own show during Endgame. Just look at what happened to Gamora. She definitely seemed as gone as she could possibly be during Infinity War. She didn't sacrifice herself, but her father sacrificed her by pitching her off the cliff on Vormir to obtain the Soul Stone. But if it helps, he did feel bad about it. Okay, no, that doesn't help at all. But the point is that she definitely seemed 100% gone, and going into Endgame, her fate appeared pretty certain. Yet, thanks to the magic, or perhaps the science of time travel, she's still alive. The Thanos from 2014 found his way into the present-day MCU and brought along the 2014 versions of Gamora and Nebula. While Nebula and Thanos didn't survive, Gamora was still alive and well at the end of the movie. We didn't see her going off with the Asgardians of the Galaxy, but we also didn't see her fade away into dust or return back to her own time or anything like that. Could time travel explain how Natasha's still alive? After all, there's another important scene we didn't get the chance to see during Endgame, which involved time travel. But before we go all back in time and stuff, let's take a look forward to your sad future without the latest content from CBR. To prevent this from becoming a reality, make sure to click on that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, either from right here or from the settings menu on your phone. Thanos may no longer be a threat in the MCU, but the YouTube algorithm could definitely impact your viewing experience. Now let's get back to Natasha and whether or not we might see her again in the current MCU timeline. Avengers Endgame was an amazing movie, but it was also a really long one. It's just 13 minutes shy of the runtime for James Cameron's Titanic, and that's a 2-taper. But even though it was just over 3 hours long, there was plenty of stuff we didn't get to see. When Smart Hulk went after the Time Stone, he got it, but not before receiving a stern lecture on the dangers of time travel from the Ancient One. She explained that taking the stones from their proper places in the timeline would create alternate universes, which could ultimately be doomed. He agreed to return the stones once the decimation was undone and Thanos was defeated. And Steve Rogers ended up being the person chosen to do so. We got to see a brief and satisfying scene of him finally getting that dance with Peggy Carter, but what about delivering the Soul Stone? Out of all the Infinity Stones, this was the return we would have most liked to see. After all, the Soul Stone was being guarded by Steve's old nemesis, the Red Skull. How did we miss out on getting to see that awkward reunion? Once the Soul Stone was gone, the Red Skull had technically fulfilled his role as its guardian, but how was he going to get home? The Space Stone transported him there, and without it, he's kinda stuck. And without anything to guard, he's just a weird red-faced guy in a robe hanging out in the middle of nowhere. If something happened when Steve returned the Soul Stone, we wouldn't have been able to see it. It's possible that returning the Infinity Stone could have revived Natasha somehow. It might not seem likely, but we're talking about infinitely powerful magical rocks here. Who really knows all the rules? Seems like the only person who does is the Red Skull, who's now out of the job. Of course, Steve would have had to have left his pal Natasha stranded, but perhaps he didn't realize that the Soul Stone had revived her. What with her being way on the bottom of the cliff and all. That's one possibility, but another way for Natasha to come back would be through straight-up time travel, the same way Gamora did. Even though Gamora was technically alive at the conclusion of Endgame, she was not really the Gamora we all know and love. This version was from a period of time before she became a founding member of the Guardians of the Galaxy. This poor Gamora didn't even know about the great hero Kevin Bacon. Sure, she's alive, but have you ever really lived if you've never seen Footloose? Despite being from different planets, Gamora and Natasha are similar in a lot of ways. They were brought up in a less than loving environment and trained to be merciless weapons for other people/organizations. They were both lacking on the friendship front for most of their lives before becoming dedicated members of teams. If we ended up getting pre-Guardians of the Galaxy Gamora back, then why can't we have the Earth version of this character back? It's entirely possible that messing around with the timelines and time travel during Endgame, as nice as it was seeing Steve and Peggy together, there's definitely a chance this had some kind of impact on the timeline. And that's just the beginning of the weird time travel multiverse shattering action that's coming our way. Let's not forget that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness is coming during Phase 4, and it promises to take a deeper dive into the enticing multiverse. Not only will it involve the immensely powerful Doctor Strange, but Wanda Maximoff is going to be a major player in that movie as well. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of general weirdness in the comic books, and Wanda is personally responsible for no small amount of it, not to mention the percentage of horrible disasters she's been part of causing. If there is an alternate universe where Black Widow's still alive, it might be revealed during this movie, or at the very least hinted at so it can be explored further later on. Not that we're already desperately trying to figure out the rest of the Phase 5 lineup before Phase 4 is even halfway through or anything like that. No. The Infinity Stones might be gone for all intents and purposes, but according to the Russo brothers, they're not really gone for good. They claim that even Thanos couldn't destroy them at an atomic level, so they still exist in a sense. If that's true, then maybe the Soul Stone is preventing Natasha from leaving Vormir, whether she was revived there or whether she ended up there through some time travel multiversal nonsense. After all, it kept the Red Skull there for quite some time, and we all know the stones have their own will, even if we're not always sure what it is. Or it's also entirely possible that she just can't escape because she doesn't have a spaceship. It's not as magical of an explanation, but it makes perfect sense. Tony Stark and Nebula ended up trapped in space after Infinity War, and they had a spaceship that not even Tony could fix. If Mr. Builds an Iron Man suit in a cave couldn't get out of that situation, what hope does Natasha have? Somehow I don't think she and the Red Skull are going to be able to get off that planet if indeed they're still there. Having Black Widow still exist in the MCU would definitely add a poignant layer to her standalone movie. Although it will undoubtedly shed some light on her past, including what happened to her in Hawkeye in Budapest, it takes place after she made her debut in the MCU. It's set at the time following Civil War, but before the beginning of Infinity War. The cast is stacked with comic book characters like the Taskmaster, the Red Guardian, Rick Mason, and Yelena Belova. It's clear this movie is going to reveal a lot about Natasha's past, which is kind of bittersweet knowing what happens to her later on. Either she fell to her doom during Endgame, or she somehow managed to survive and is trapped on Vormir. Neither one of those options is very cheerful, especially for a character who sacrificed so dang much to keep the world safe. But if we're talking about a previous version of Natasha, then it's possible she hasn't yet made all of those sacrifices. Maybe she hasn't yet become the hero we'll see in the Black Widow movie, who has the benefit of her years with the Avengers. Sure, there were definitely some bad times, like pretty much everything that happened during Civil War, but there were absolutely some good times too, and it's clear Natasha changed quite a bit over the years. In fact, depending on how much the timeline's been goofed up, this version might be a foe rather than a friend. There are a lot of storylines in the comic books where Natasha is less than heroic and is in fact downright criminal. If she rejoins the MCU on the current timeline, it's just as possible that she'll be a villain rather than a hero. Actress Scarlett Johansson has portrayed the character for years, and needless to say, she's gotten pretty attached. So what does she think about the odds that Black Widow will show up on the current timeline outside of her standalone movie or any future flashbacks? Well, to put it bluntly, she says the odds are terrible. According to Johansson, filming Endgame left her feeling wiped out, both physically and mentally. And she missed out on the big final battle sequence, so you can just imagine how all the other actors felt. She says that Natasha's ending gave her a sense of closure, but she understands why many fans hope the Black Widow is still alive. But then she proceeded to dash those hopes against the cliffs of Vormir by describing her end as a pretty final thing. Apparently, Scarlett is unimpressed with all the fan theories out there regarding Black Widow managing to survive. Not that it hurts my feelings or anything like that. But there are a couple shreds of hope we can cling to here. The first is that her comments about the permanence of passing away are only true in the real world. Yes, when people perish here, they don't come back. At least not in the way they do in certain works of fiction. But in the comic books, that's definitely not true. People come back all the time, from multiverses merging, time travel, or because their essence lived on and was later transplanted into a clone or something. You know, comic book stuff. Maybe she's just thinking too realistically about this fictional character. Plus, if Johansson knew there was a chance of her character being revived, would she really have spilled the beans during an interview like this? Come on, we're not talking about Tom Holland or Mark Ruffalo here. Those two love nothing better than dropping huge spoilers on unsuspecting fans, and we have to admit we don't hate that they do it. But this star isn't known for leaking important MCU information, and Black Widow still being alive would definitely be a huge deal. So maybe she's still alive, and Johansson wants to keep her that way by not spilling the beans and angering the House of Mouse. Ruffalo was worried about losing his position after he streamed the first 10 minutes or so of Thor Ragnarok, so maybe job security is on her mind. Although, to be fair, he's still around, despite blurting out that half of the population of the universe would disappear during Infinity War. Oh, Mark Ruffalo, never change. My job depends on it. If Black Widow is still alive, it makes sense that Johansson would not reveal this during an interview. She's also talked about how her passing was honorable, which is absolutely true regardless of whether or not her loss is permanent. But as much as I hate to admit it, it's possible that Black Widow really is gone. Sure, Loki and possibly Gamora got free get-out-of-being-written-off passes, but handing them out to everyone means they'll lose their meaning. If anything, her not being revived is just another way she didn't get her due. Gamora plunged to her doom and was just fine, but Natasha has to stay down for the count. That wraps up CBR's take on the fate of Black Widow, but unfortunately her solo movie isn't out yet. If you want to hear even more about this great character and what might come next in the MCU, be sure to check out our friends over at Screen Rant. Just promise you'll come back. Since the MCU is short on heroes at the moment, it wouldn't be the worst thing for Black Widow to come back, especially since she gained some management experience during Endgame. What do you think the odds are that she's still alive on Vormir? Let us know what you think in the comments section below, and don't forget to give us a like, click that subscribe button, and turn on your notifications for more videos from us here at CBR. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.